Good. There we go. And just to clarify, everyone, if you have any questions throughout, if you can just use the chat function, that would be great. And then there'll be a section at the end where we can read out the questions to Georgia and Joe. Equally, you can always unmute, raise your hand in that end section as well. So, yeah, Georgia, Joe, if you'd like to take it away.
Fab, thank you, Elle. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. I can't believe how many people have signed up. I'm not gonna lie, I'm quite nervous, but hopefully it'll be okay. Um, so yes, I'm just gonna quickly move my Zoom so I can see a couple of you, but it's not in the way of the slides. Give me 2 seconds. Um, okay, so yeah, so today's session is AI-powered content creation for law firms beyond the basics. So I'm Georgia, I'm head of search at Conscious, and then I'm also joined by Joe, who is our senior digital content executive. Um, so we'll get started. So when we ran our first AI webinars a couple of years ago, I think the world looked very different. Google search worked in a way that it had done for a very long time. Traffic and rankings were the metrics everyone focused on. And when we talked about generative AI, the conversation was really just about, what these tools could do. You could write a page of content, you could generate an image, and it felt extraordinary, and everyone was really excited, and rightly so, because it was so different. Um, but what's happened since? Since then, as AI has completely transformed the digital landscape. ChatGPT has more than 900 million weekly active users. And to put that into context, it reached 100 million users within 2 months, figures that took Google 10 years or so. Um, Google search itself has seen the biggest changes it's gone in around 20 years. AI overviews, zero-click results, and people getting answers directly from tools like ChatGPT. The way in which people find and consume information has fundamentally shifted, and that has real consequences for us as marketers in terms of how we deliver the content. Um, so the key takeaway from all of this is that standing out has never been more important. When everyone has access to the same tools, the baseline level of content quality goes up. And that means then that generic AI generated content is everywhere. So what really cuts through now is human insight, original perspectives, strong brand voice, and your firm's genuine expertise and values. So what we really wanted to do today was, get the balance right. We've tried to put ourselves in your shoes. If you're working within a firm, you've got limited time and resources, and you need to increase your content output. But how do you use AI to do that effectively whilst also making sure everything you produce reflects the kind of quality and originality that you stand for? And how we can stand out in a world where AI content is everywhere. So that's the kind of running thread throughout today's session. Um, and we sometimes get asked whether we're, worried about talking about AI so openly, whether, if we've got clients on the call or whether we're giving away secrets. But, the bottom line is we're a digital marketing agency. AI is just another piece of technology that we use in our stack. And we're here to kind of bring you as many updates and keep you as informed as we can. And, the real value in AI is really about, the expertise, the insight, testing that goes beyond the scenes. So, we're going to share a lot today, but the way in which we actually kind of use AI with Conscious is kind of tailored to each client and what works for them. Um, so yeah, okay, we will get started. So we'll go through kind of what's happened well, up until today. We'll talk about kind of what's changed in search. We'll cover some tools, what's out there, what they all do, what our kind of recommendations are for when you're thinking about which AI tool to stick with. And then we'll kind of go into the main message, which is that beyond the basics, strategic prompting. We'll talk about some risks and guardrails. Then we'll talk about thought leadership and AI. And then we'll go through a kind of workflow example of, again, us sort of putting ourselves in your shoes. How can you get from here to here and how you can use AI to help you do that? And then we'll go into a bit of a Q&A. Oh, I might just to check. So if anyone has any questions, is it to just drop them in the chat box? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Drop them in the chat
Fab.
and then, yeah, we'll cover them at the end.
Perfect. Okay. Um, okay, so the AI landscape. So where are we in 2026? The first thing is that all models, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, are getting significantly better. at writing and reasoning, and the pace of improvement is only accelerating. I don't know about anyone else, but I find it quite overwhelming actually, at just how the speed, at the rate of which things are changing. Every day, you log on to Claude or something, and there's a brand new feature. Um, but these tools are no longer experimental. They're embedded in everyday workflows for a lot of teams. But that creates its own challenge because, yeah, if everyone has access to those tools, then how are people being different? That the baseline of content quality shifts upwards. So what was impressive a year ago might now be kind of table stakes. But at the same time, and this is a point which ties into a blog that we recently published, our SEO for Law Firms blog. I don't know if anyone's read that. Um, Maybe Geminel, we could link that when we send over the slides. But AI overviews, zero-click search, conversational AI tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity answering questions directly. All of this means that generic surface level content is increasingly invisible. So in creating excellent experience-led content matters now more than it has done before. And the other thing that's changed significantly, which isn't the main point about today's webinar, but something that's really important to touch on, is brand. Brand is king or queen, as I like to say. But in this new kind of era of search, your website is still the anchor, and that's the place that you fully control. You have full control over what content people are getting about your firm when they go onto your website. But your website is not the only place your brand is being represented. So when someone asks ChatGPT or Perplexity about your firm and searches for you through an AI overview, those tools are pulling in information from all sorts of places, your Google business profile, review sites, directories, forums, social media, and they're all synthesizing all of that information into one answer. So if all that information across those touch points is inconsistent, outdated, or it's just not there, that's what gets reflected back to the person asking. So it just means that you need to think about your brand visibility much more broadly than just your website. And you need to think about where your firm's showing up, what's being said, and whether that information is accurate. Because it's pulling from everywhere and it treats all of those sources as part of your brand story. And this is something we've kind of been doing a lot with our clients recently, kind of brand auditing, looking at how they're appearing across all those touch points. So just to kind of give them a baseline of, okay, this is how I'm appearing in search, and this is how I need, how I need to move forward. This is what I need to prioritize to make sure I've got better control over that brand. So yeah, it's just becoming a really important part of the picture, and content, AI, brand, search are all now one conversation rather than a little bit more separate. So if the last slide is kind of what's changed, this is about now what this kind of means in practice. So if someone searches what is conveyancing or how long does probate take, the chances are that an AI system answering that question, the AI system is answering it directly on the search results page. So in that AI overview, the user may now never visit your website for that kind of an informational query, whereas before that they would have done that. So that content still matters, but it's the job that's changed. So it's no longer just about driving a click, it's about being the source that the AI systems trust and cite when they generate those answers. So Google's algorithm updates over the past year have been very clear in the direction that it's going in, and it will always move in. Trust, helpfulness, and genuine expertise are being weighed more heavily than ever. And it's really hard to keep up to date with Google. And, even as a digital marketing team, we have no idea what Google's going to say tomorrow. They might make a massive change, which impacts the way that we work and the way that we report. But what we do know is that it's fundamentally always driven by trust, helpfulness, expertise. So I think that's just something really good to keep in mind when you're creating content. So it just means that thin content, keyword stuffed content, content that's being produced without any real insight, that's all being filtered out. The user journey looks completely different now. So the old model was linear. You rank, someone clicks, they validate on your site. Now it's more like AI gives them the answer. They go and validate. They go to your website, they go to your reviews, your social, they see what people are saying about you on Reddit. And only then, if they're happy to take action, is when they click through. So the click happens a lot later in the process, but when it does, that means that the visitor is much more qualified and much more closer to making a decision, which is great, and that's what we want. So this is why we'll keep coming back to kind of quality over volume. One genuine, excellent piece of content that demonstrates real experience and real insight will always outperform five average ones. Because that's the kind of content that gets cited by the AI systems, that builds trust during the validation stage, and that ultimately drives the inquiry. So, the days of publishing volume for volume's sake are definitely behind us. Okay, I'll pass on to Joe.
Yeah, so AI tools. First things first, there's a million out there. There are so many to run through, and we do not have time to cover every single one, obviously. But we wanted to kind of focus on the ones we think are probably most useful for content creation specifically. Um, this isn't necessarily a review of each one, and we're not saying one's necessarily better than the other, but they all kind of have their own uses, their own kind of niches, things they're particularly strong at. So ChatGPT, as Georgia mentioned earlier, it's still probably the number one tool, probably the most widely used, the one people are most familiar with. And there's a good reason for that because it's a very solid all-rounder for everything from drafting content, brainstorming, iterating content over time. You can also build things like custom GPTs, which are kind of essentially reusable configurations that factor in things like your desired tone of voice, your style guide, things like that can be baked in. So we'll kind of go on to discuss how that can look in practice in a bit. Claude's probably the biggest talking point at the moment. It's the thing I think most people are interested to see how it works because it does seem to have almost come out of nowhere in the past few months. It's now the new kid on the block. So it's gaining a lot of prominence mainly because of this idea of it's built on honesty approach. So it's really starting to come out on top for things like nuanced writing, detailed analysis, and working with really long, complex documents. So it's really good for that. Um, Microsoft Copilot, we're seeing a lot of firms adopt that, and I guess that's for good reason because it makes sense because it's running on Microsoft, so you can embed it directly into Word, Outlook, Teams. So it kind of meets up with how people are already working and sort of fits into their workflow quite seamlessly. So completely makes sense. I think it's quite good for drafting and summarizing within these documents, doing things like tidying up emails, pulling together meeting notes from teams. So I think for firms that maybe want to start using AI without trying to introduce a completely new tool into the workflow, I think it's a really natural starting point. Perplexity, so that's essentially AI powered search, is probably the best way of describing it. Uh, it provides really good answers with cited sources, so it's really good for research, we found, kind of competitor analysis, fact checking, things like that. If you want to understand why a certain page is ranking, it's a really helpful tool for that. Fathom. So this is Fathom or any AI note-taking tool. We're going to go into this in quite a lot of detail later, but it's something we think is really underused at the moment. So they essentially work by recording meetings and meeting notes, but also going a little bit deeper, extracting themes from those meeting notes can potentially generate content angles from the conversations you have. But like I said, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, and also how it fits into this concept of integrating AI and thought leadership. And then finally, just to touch on Gemini. So Gemini is Google's AI tool, very similar to other ones in terms of it's good for anything search related, keyword research, that kind of insight. But like we said, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. Our kind of recommendation, if you have any kind of doubts about which tool you want to use, or you're faced with a full load of tools on your research list, is to just think about what your current requirements are, what you're potentially looking for an AI tool to do for you, and then just choose one to start with. And if you can, try and get the paid version because these all have free and paid versions, and obviously the paid version is usually a lot better, a lot more capable. You can do more for longer on them. But yeah, I we would recommend choose one, and don't spread yourself too thin across multiple tools at once, so you can really get to grips with how one in particular works and how it can benefit you.
I was just going to add to that, Joe, about yeah, in that kind of decision making process of finding a tool that works for you, um, if you pick one, then it will just make everything a little bit easier in terms
Mm.
of being able to create best practice guidance, sharing prompts between your team, maybe organizing it in like a structure and a hierarchy which everyone can
Yeah,
access. In terms of us trying to get to a place where we're being more sustainable with our prompting, again, having one
yeah,
tool on which you can build those prompt processes is really good. And just in terms of sort of knowledge sharing, and if you're at a point where you've got an AI policy, it just makes that a bit easier as well. So
yeah.
yeah, that would be the recommendation.
And it is, and you'll naturally build your expertise a lot quicker if you're using one tool rather than, yeah, spreading yourself across multiple at once and kind of dipping your toes into different tools. It does help to just concentrate on one to build that process out.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So beyond the basics, which is kind of the main crux of this session. So when we talk about this idea of beyond the basics, I think it kind of boils down to this idea that I think we are all well past the stage of typing in a single simple prompt into ChatGPT and then expecting to have a finished output at the end of it. We've been using these kind of tools now. I think it's probably like feels like 4 or 5 years. I think that's about right since they really sort of came to prominence. So I think we all expect more, but maybe aren't exactly sure how to take the next step. Um, Having access to all of these tools is great, and it does obviously provide a lot of benefits, but I think it also comes with a growing expectation that you can exponentially increase your content output. And you can. That is true, you can, but it can potentially come at the expense of quality. And that can be counterproductive, especially given everything Georgia has run through about the general AI landscape at the moment. So we want to kind of emphasize that the real value at the moment comes from treating AI more as a thinking partner. So it's not like a vendor machine, you press a single button, a prompt, and you get a finished product at the end of it. But it's more a collaborative tool that you work with through multiple steps and stages, refining as you go, layering in your own human expertise at every opportunity. And that's the key message for today. It's not about teaching you how to get AI to write the perfect blog from start to finish with a single prompt, because that's not really possible. It's more about how you leverage AI and help you create content that you couldn't normally produce on your own in a specific time window, and doing it by harnessing real experience, human input, things like SEO awareness, and ultimately doing this through strategic prompting, which I'll go into now. So, how do we actually move beyond this generic kind of workflow of having one prompt and then one output? We need to kind of transition into this mindset of adopting strategic prompting methods. And I know that kind of sounds like a bit of a buzzword, but it's the best way of describing the process. So it's treating the AI workflow as a constantly evolving and cascading process. So the more detailed the process you follow is, the more you advance your instructions over time, the more the AI can learn exactly what you're looking for. So the key is, yeah, to think in terms of layers of refinement. So if you have a really, really basic prompt, so off the top of my head, thinking something like, help me structure a 500 word blog on the benefits of using mediation in family law. So you can take that even further with just really, really simple steps, such as defining the role, defining the tone, defining sort of guardrails, and then going on to refine it. So if we take that example, you could clearly define the role of the AI within your prompt. So you could say something like, you are an expert in UK family law. And then that immediately eliminates anything the tool is not. And then you can narrow that down further by adding your tone or your style guidelines. So you could say something like, write in a warm manner, avoid corporate jargon. And then you can also layer in certain guardrails and do not do's. So you could say only reference UK legal terms. So you've already, just by that simple process, you've already gone from one really, really, really simple prompt, help me structure a 500-word blog on mediation in family law. And you've gone on to then develop it to, you're an expert in UK family law, help me structure 500-word blog post, write in a warm manner, only reference UK legal terms. So that's like a really basic example of just how that refinement process can work. But this is just we want to emphasize this would just be the starting point.
Yeah.
So the layers of refinement you add to a prompt should cascade over time. It's much better to start really simple with something like that rather than trying to give AI one really massive complex prompt with everything you can possibly think of all in one go. It's better to keep modifying things until the output matches what you're looking for. And some kind of extra tips to help improve that process, which I think some people might not necessarily be aware of what AI is capable of. It's quite useful to tell AI what not to be. It's as useful to tell it what not to be as it is to tell it what to be. So if you're saying don't use M dashes, because that's obviously one of the first things we try and tell AI, because that's what it loves to include. Or don't use a generic opening, don't use cliches, don't write in AI speak. Telling it what not to do is just as important as telling it what to do. And a really, really useful trick and something it's got so much better at, I think, and over the past couple of years is actually asking the AI to think about what it's doing and to critique its own output. And you can use that to then improve your instructions. So you can even do things like if you've given it a prompt, you can ask it, how do I make this prompt even better? Or ask it what it else it needs or what context is missing from the prompt. We found that especially Claude is really, really good at that. It seems to be able to think about everything really, really deeply. And this comes back to this idea of you're working with AI as a thinking partner, so it's always there to bounce things back and forth. So it's really, really good for that. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how that strategic prompting process can look in practice.
I was just going to add as well, something that you can do is if you've been trying to get a kind of specific output and you've been having a little back and forth, and we've all kind of had that where you're going like, no, that's
Yeah.
not quite right.
Yeah,
Like
stop.
when you go back and forth and you're getting a bit frustrated, you could once you finally got the output that you want, you can go back and say, okay, if I wanted to get that output a bit quicker in the
Mm,
process, what prompt should I have given you? And you can just see what it comes back with. You'd have to try and test that and see if it works, but a lot of the time
yeah.
it will think about those context gaps that it's missed,
Yeah. I think
why it
it's just that idea of not being afraid to have the back and forth. Like it does seem a bit at first when you're doing it, you feel a little bit silly doing it because it's almost like you're having a conversation into the void, but it really does help by just taking the time to just have back and forth with it. Because like we say, there it's becoming so much more sophisticated in terms of what it can learn. So yeah, it's good to keep that in mind. So this kind of feeds into the next point we want to make, and it's what you can feed AI tools to complement these strategic prompts. Um, it's always a good starting point to think about what your desired outcome actually is, and think about that before you take any kind of first steps. So you want to ask yourself what sort of questions like what do you want the content to ultimately achieve? And then ask the AI how it can help you deliver that. Um, if you've got any additional context you can give the AI, use it. So if you have existing guidelines like tone of voice documents, style guides, examples of content you like the look of, this is probably one of the most important steps because the more reference material you provide, the better the output is going to be because the more it's going to learn from that. Um, and the other thing you can think of if you don't have access to things like tone of voice, you can ask it to help you develop that and then use that in future prompts. Um, think about your audience. So, are there any kind of specific insights or considerations the AI should factor in when it's providing an output? Um, like the example I just gave, where I was talking about if you need help on a blog, and you're saying you want it to be UK legal specific, and it would then know to avoid kind of any American terms, which is something it quite often likes to do. Um, Make sure you're thinking about SEO and AI visibility, as Georgia was discussing at the start. The content always needs to serve a direct purpose. There's no point just producing something for the sake of producing it. So make sure you do some basic keyword research if you have that ability, or if you don't necessarily have the tools to do that. Take a look through the search engine results pages, see what's kind of working, what's coming out on top, and then how you can feed that in. Um, and quite crucially, if you are able to, it's always good to provide a case study or kind of a unique insight or real world example for it to learn off of. This is the sort of thing that kind of transforms generic AI output that we're all growing used to into something that's really genuinely useful, and it's differentiated. Um, and it comes back to this refinement loop to help define this. So, as we were saying, you don't want to start with one really, really long, complex prompt at the start. You need to iterate over time. So, you need to have a defined kind of refinement loop sort of weaved into your process. You want to iterate, you want to make sure there's clear structure, and you want to give context. And we've included the AI sandwich method just as a touch point because this is something Georgia went into real depth in on a previous conscious conversation. So I think in basic terms, it's just this idea of starting with a seed. So your own input, draft text, data sets. You want to enhance it. So ask AI to transform it, reframe it, refine it, applying your own expertise, and then iterating. So feeding in polished output back into AI for deeper exploration. And it is, as we say, it's a loop. It's a constantly evolving loop that goes round and round, and it gets better and better over time.
Yeah, and it's just a kind of it's not a process you absolutely have to follow in terms of
Mm.
like the step by step, but it's just something, a really good thing to keep in the back of your mind every time you're using AI, that that's the kind of way you should be using it, as that kind of layer.
Mm.
And the human insight is really the most valuable part of that process.
Yeah, I think you'll quite often see if you need help and you're looking for resources online, you'll see people sort of saying this is the one prompt that you need to generate the perfect output every time. So I don't think that's necessarily it's not how it works. It's everything is always going to be tailored to your goal essentially, and the unique elements to make your firm different from everyone else, and how that then links to content output. So I think that's important to keep in mind, to not take those things at face value, take them at face value, and they're not necessarily, there's no right or wrong answers when it comes to prompting. There's no secret formula that's going to help you perform at the top of every single search result.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd cover risk and guardrails because I think it is always important to keep in mind and not to get carried away with this sort of stuff. Because yes, we've been using it for a number of years now, and we're probably aware of them, but there's always new sort of risk and guardrails that kind of creep in, and just important to keep an eye on. So firstly, hallucinations. We've all seen a hallucination of some description when we're working with AI. It's a big issue, and it's not something that's necessarily going to go away anytime soon because they aren't perfect models in any way. AI models can make things up, and they do it really confidently sometimes, and it can make you really question what you're doing. So it's a really real risk and something you shouldn't ignore. So if you don't necessarily know a topic better than the AI you're working with, it's easy to be fooled. So, and it's also actually on that point, it's also important to keep in mind that the fuller your context window, so by that we mean the longer your sort of conversation history is within a specific chat, there's a sort of more a greater risk that hallucinations are going to creep in because it's trying to bring together lots of different stuff at once. So as with any of these sort of things, just triple check everything, especially when it comes to specific facts, case references, any claims it's making. Secondly, confidential data. So I think this is fairly self-explanatory, but if you're using AI in any way, so this includes AI note takers that again we'll discuss in a minute, but make sure you're reviewing what has sort of been captured, put in before you feed it into an AI tool for processing. So just be mindful of what is actually being uploaded. Um, Third is tone risk. This is a bit, this is where that kind of the sophisticated layered prompting approach comes in and where this really pays off. Because the more detailed your instructions, the more context you provide, the more you iterate over time, the less likely you are going to end up with that generic AI voice that we all kind of start with when we're working with AI for the first time. And something that everyone kind of recognizes now and everyone is almost like on the hunt for when they're looking at digital content. So keep working with your instruction files and your prompt process and any previous example content until you kind of nail down a tone. And you can always, again, use AI to kind of help you explain what might be wrong with a certain output and it's generating a generic voice. And then you can use that to edit your initial input. Fourthly, over reliance. We want to go back to this idea that AI is a thinking partner. It's a supplementary tool to what you're doing. It's not a replacement for your own expertise or anyone else's expertise. So if you're tasked with handling a certain topic or writing about a certain topic that you're not necessarily like fully clued up on, there's certain ways to help overcome that. And this is what we're going to go into with this idea of integrating thought leadership and AI, and capturing that expertise and kind of having some agency and some human control over what you're doing. And that is what helps content stand out ultimately. And finally, consistency. So if you're not necessarily the sole person that's doing sort of work on AI tools, and you've got a few people in your team that are all on the same shared account or executing a shared content plan, it's important to have some shared ground rules and to make sure you're all on the same page. Because if you're all using it in a different way and you all have certain things that you like to do, or one person's gatekeeping a really successful prompt, for example, the content that's going to be produced at the end of it is going to be it's a bit different, slightly different, and then the overall quality is brought down and becomes unpredictable. So yeah, it's good to just make sure everything is consistent across multiple individuals and teams.
Um, okay, so now we're going to just talk a little bit more about thought leadership, and kind of how we can capture experience without creating bottlenecks. I know that scaling thought leadership is definitely a common area of frustration, in marketers, but I think specifically in law firms,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about this and kind of, marketing teams and also just anyone in the firm really wanting to get their experience out there, but just not having the time, which is,
Yeah.
completely understandable. And the traditional model being you might need a fee earner to write a blog themselves or to sit with them and review some posts, but they're busy, they've got client work, so content isn't always able to be the priority. And sometimes it kind of ends up going out, but without anything that's real insight from the people that are making the decisions within the firm. So AI can really help us change this. So I don't know how many of you use note takers. I mean, I don't know if we can, would anyone mind sharing whether just, or like a raise of hands if they use some sort of note taker or Fathom or anything like that? No? I can't see everyone, but okay. Yeah, that's it. Okay, Michelle, I can see you do. Okay. No, it's just interesting because it's a really, really, really good way of being able to capture expertise without having to ask, one of the solicitors to sit down and, write some points themselves or get them to send bullet points over for a blog. Um, so AI tools like Fathom could record internal conversations. It can take the transcript, it can extract notes, it can identify content angles and turn them into content ideas. So the expert doesn't have to write anything. They just need to talk about their work, which I think most people love to do. And I think if you can get someone on a call, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, and get them to talk about things they're passionate about in the work that they do, an interesting case that's going on at the minute that they could share, or if you've got an idea for a blog that you want to write that's to do with their department, just getting them to share some ideas and insights. And we'll talk about in a minute about how you can kind of use that then to build a content outline. But I think that point, if you can get someone on a call and you can record that meeting, if they're happy for you to record it, then it just means that you've then got that kind of like gold content, which a lot of people don't have. And that's what would really make you stand out, I think, in terms of producing content. So you can also do things. So if you're trying to think about topics for blogs or content to write, you can use tools like People Also Ask. That's a great tool. You can also look at Search Console, if that's kind of a tool you're familiar with. And you can also just have a look at what your competitors are writing about. There's absolutely no harm in that. But what will be brilliant is then if you can think about that topic, you say, right, we want to write a blog on that. But then you go to that team, that department, the kind of people working in that department, and you ask for their nuanced insight and perspective, because that is what's going to make your content really stand out. So, these are kind of some really excellent sources for thought leadership topics. So I tried to kind of think about it. If I was going out and I was needing to get some sort of medical procedure or surgery, if I was going on to, that's obviously something, it's a massive important decision. And same with kind of any legal decision, I suppose. If anyone's going to they need to work with someone from a legal team, I instantly would be going out and looking for something that differentiates that firm, that medical practice, for example, from someone else. And a lot of the time it's then looking for that really, that thought leadership, people writing blogs on different topics, people giving perspective, because it shows the customer or the client looking that person really cares about the work that they do. And it's similar again, if you're looking to make a buying decision, I don't know if anyone about here, but if you're kind of looking to buy clothes, I am not buying, I need to see that reviews. I like when people post photos of it, and it's just that real kind of living proof of the work that's being done, or the quality of something. So yeah, in kind of everything that's going on at the minute, that real thought leadership, human insight, nuanced perspective, but then also real examples of kind of case studies and statistics, that kind of thing is what people are really gravitating towards now, with a kind of bloated internet of content at the minute.
Yeah, it's also the thing to keep in mind with we often we read and we hear from clients about like their mission statements and stuff and their values and their goals, and it's easy for those things to just sort of become a little bit empty if they're not backed up with this sort of thing. So when you have real expertise being shown and the thought leaders in your firm actually fronting up and showing what they're doing, it helps to prove those things. So they aren't empty statements; they are proven and backed up. So it's just another thing to keep in mind.
Mhm. And a kind of example of this from a conscious point of view. So one of our SEO team, Chris, wrote a brilliant blog at 2026 SEO for law firms, and we knew that if we could get him on a camera to record a little video for about what the key points are in that blog, that would be really, really good, and that would perform really well. And he really didn't want to do it, but he did a brilliant job. It went on the website, and then Alan Gem, I think we saw the results kind of from the next day, that was then appearing in the AI overviews, because it's just showing a real person giving their real insight, sharing knowledge. So yeah, if you can do that. So it's one thing if you can get them on a call and record so you can get the transcript. If you can even go a step further and record the meeting, and they'll allow you to maybe get a little snippet for social media or to add to the blog, a video recording, that would be brilliant. It might be a bit of a stretch, but if you can, make the most of it. So yeah, it sort of leads into the next slide, which is what AI can't replicate. I've kind of already covered this, but yeah, case studies, real outcomes. AI can summarize the law, it can pull information together from multiple sources, but it can't. So it could create a fake case study, but it's not going to be real. So, it's commentary on recent legislation and legal developments, what to expect, processes, and how that works in practice, not just in theory. local knowledge, regional context, court-specific insight, videos where solicitors are explaining something directly. All of this is, your uncopyable advantage. If your content includes these elements, then it's almost defensible from generic AI slop, as people call it now. AI can't generate your experience, your outcomes, or your local insight. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity for firms actually in this space, because I think a lot of the time when we're talking about um, you know, legal SEO and legal marketing, a lot of the time the content that we have to put on our websites in terms of service pages generally has to cover, say, here or there, like the same sort of thing because it's the law. So this is almost like a real opportunity for firms to go, okay, how can I really differentiate my content? So that would be going to, a solicitor, giving this topic and say, okay, so what's your perspective on this? Or how has your perspective changed over time? That kind of thing, to just really give some, that really interesting perspective. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what AI can't replicate. So I think Joe's going to now cover kind of
Yeah.
that couple of things that we've talked about, but just in a really practical example, step by step.
Yeah, so this would be like a really simple, straightforward example of how this sort of can all feed together. If you had a task you needed to execute and you needed to use a few different AI tools to help you do it. So let's say that you've been asked to write an article about a really recent legal development, a new bit of legislation, something like that, and you need to have some extra sort of expert input into it. So if we were sort of following the processes we've been talking about, the first step you would probably do is work with AI to kind of generate an agenda of questions, and these questions to be used on a call with the subject matter expert. So that'd be a fee earner, solicitor within the firm. So you wouldn't be asking AI to write an article at this stage. You're just asking it to help you prepare for a conversation and give you some raw material. So give you some questions. This wouldn't require a really detailed prompt. This would just be a simple back and forth. Ask if give it a bit of context. Ask it to generate some bullet points, some questions which you can use as prompts in a conversation. Next step you would set up a call. Make sure you have an AI note taker, record it. So you would then capture that expert's insight. So, but any case studies they've been working on in relation to the updates, what their real world experience is, and as we've sort of said, you can do all that with them without them having to ever write a single word. So instead of having to sit and chase someone up and constantly ask them to write a blog and that taking weeks or even months, you've been able to do that, within the space of half an hour, however long the call takes. The next step you would do, you've got all your notes together. You would merge them with any additional keyword research you want to do. So making sure if you've got access to tools such as Ahrefs, making sure you've got a detailed sort of analysis. But if you don't, you can simply just analyze search results for the kind of target keywords you're looking for around that topic. You just want to understand what's ranking, what kind of questions people are asking, and where, importantly, if there is any gaps in the sort of market and where your expert's input can slot in quite nicely. So then you've got all this together, feed all of this then into your AI. So your notes, your keyword research, any additional guidelines you've got about tone of voice, feed that into your AI, ask it to create a content outline for you. Again, not a finished article. We don't want it to generate an entirely a blog from start to finish. It's better to have a sort of outline that you can work with. And then you can then write the content based on this. You're filling in the gaps, using the outline as kind of a framework, layering in the expertise you've been able to get from the expert you were working with, any extra insight. And obviously, this is the human element that you're adding to it. And then step 6, you go through that review, refinement, iterate format. So you can go back and forth with your prompt to make sure you have a final output. So that's just kind of like a really simple overview of how that might look if you were tasked with producing that kind of content. This one, you, Georgia?
Yeah, I can cover
Yeah.
this. So yeah, so that kind of workflow is just a really simple way that you could maybe just capture the insight that you really need if you don't have, the time. And you do not have to follow every, step from that. You could take one element of that if that's kind of what works for you. And also, we have quite a lot of clients who are kind of able to maybe do the first step of that. They can get that insight from Vienna, but maybe they don't have time they can't do the keyword research or the writing or the outline, so they can kind of then pass that to us, and we can kind of take it from there. But that insight, that opinion from the kind of experts is the real like gold in all of this. So a few additional things. Sorry, I'm a bit wary of time because I know we've been talking for a long time, but this is the final slide. A few additional things you can do. So you could use AI to analyze your competitor blogs. So you can think about, what are they covering that you're not? What structure are they using? This is real competitive intelligence that would take you a long time to do, but it can pull out things like headers that you've missed, questions then that you might not have answered. You can ask it to review your own content, tell you where there's opportunities for keywords to be inserted, tell you whether it goes in, enough depth, whether it tells you that, it needs to be structured in a different way. Something really interesting that you can do, which some of you might have heard me talk about before, but if you're in a position where you don't think you've kind of got a real solid tone of voice across the content that you put out, and you really, you don't necessarily want AI to create that for you. You want that to really come from your firm. Go to your Google reviews, take a couple of the reviews from there, probably the good ones, put them into the AI and ask it to kind of pull out some key words that people are using about you, what clients have really said about the people that work in the firm, and ask it to pull together a kind of nice tone of voice guide based on that. You can also use AI to sort of say, here are some reviews. Can you please put some of this language into the work, into the blogs that we're writing? Because ultimately, then it's like the real experience is being fed through and is distributed through the content you're putting out, which is, I think, really nice. And I don't know whether Google necessarily would see that as a, they can make that connection if that makes sense. But if we're thinking about the principal values of Google of consistency, trust, then it makes sense. Condense the blog into a video script. Yeah, that's something you could do, and you can. That's something that we've been testing quite a lot at the minute. But yeah, as I said, if you can get a little snippet of the expert talking on camera, that would be amazing. And then yeah, so just kind of a practical last tip, sort of choosing really strong H1s and H2s, making sure your keywords are in there. That's obviously just for SEO best practice. And if you can embed a video, that would be brilliant. Okay, so we have made it to the end. That was a lot to cover. I hope you're all still with us. But just quickly, some kind of final key takeaways. So AI has changed how content is created. We spent today showing you that, but search has changed how content is now found. So AI overviews, zero-click results, conversational AI answering questions directly. It's not just enough now to create well. You have to create with a real understanding of how people are actually finding the information. And the content that wins in that environment is grounded in real expertise and nuanced insight, case studies, commentaries, legal developments, legal knowledge, real client experiences, all knowledge that I know, looking at some of you here, some of our clients, I know you have that in your firm, and it's just how we can get that out. So, if you can use AI to help you capture and scale that, that is such a competitive advantage. So, if you can invest time in refining your prompts, building your workflows, setting up some processes that can kind of capture that expert knowledge efficiently. And the firms that build these habits will be producing better content faster 6 months from now, because content, brand, and visibility are kind of all now one conversation. So the content you create feeds your brand determines how you show up in AI search, and then your visibility across all those touch points is what drives trust and inquiries. So yeah, I think the firms that kind of join those dots now will be the ones that see the benefits in the future. So I think that is everything. I will finally stop yapping.
Oh,
And I
thank you. Oh,
Erin.
oh, thanks, Georgia, so much. Thank you both for such a great session. there's lots of quick wins there that people can take away and implement straight away. But if anyone else has any questions that you'd like to direct to Joe and Georgia, please feel free. Now is the time to do it. Like I said at the start, you can do it in the chat or unmute yourself. Either works. So
So that's fine if no
no.
one has any questions. Could I ask, just to kind of pass it on, how did the content, I feel, I suppose, sit with you, or is it kind of helpful for where you're at now, or is it maybe a little bit too far on from where you're at now in terms of how you're using AI? No, that'll be out. Let me see, there's one here in the chat. So sorry, I hadn't seen these. So can you use Fathom for conversations that include confidential information? So you can you can use Fathom and stuff, but you just need to check your permissions and your settings to make sure about where that data is captured. So we would recommend having the paid version, which means you've got a little bit more control over that. But when we talk about kind of using AI to pull that content from the recording. So that's where you just need to be careful. So before you put that information into the AI tools like Claude or ChatGPT,
Mm.
just make sure that's kind of anonymized or there's nothing in there that you wouldn't want to share. Um, so for me, it was about right. I use AI a lot, but not yet for content drafting. So want to get that insight. That's great. Oh, I'm really glad that you all found it helpful. But yeah, if anyone has any specific questions, let us know. And also, for anyone that's maybe the prompting is the strategic prompting, you're not quite there yet.
Mm.
Um, Give us a shout. I mean, Joe's been I think you've been doing some work this week, haven't you, by where we've had a firm who have had some prompts that they were using, but they weren't quite getting the result they wanted. So Joe
Yeah.
kind of jumped on a call and helped them refine that for what they need.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do with it, and it is just, like we said, there is no right or wrong answer. It's an iterative process over time, so it's just keeping that in mind. And if you are sort of hitting any roadblocks, you're getting frustrated with it, it's completely normal. It's just that's the nature of it is an ever evolving beast, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, amazing. And it's great to hear, just looking in the chat now, so many of the points covered today, guys, of being, reinforcing what people are doing with their marketing currently. So that's great to hear. Just to reiterate, that we will be sending a recording of this session to everyone today. So, if you need to like look back, and we've got obviously the slides as well that we can share, of course, we will do so with you all. Yeah, sorry, I'm just going through the chat. I didn't get the notifications to begin with, so now it's just making sure that nothing is missed. But I think it's just lots of positive feedback, so that's always nice. So yeah, unless anyone has,
I can
oh,
just see one
Alan.
final
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
sorry, Alan's question. Go on, Georgia.
Yeah, so what's the latest about how Google reads AI generate content and ranks it or not? So there's no real definite answer, but what Google is looking for is good content. I think we're going to get to a place where it almost can't even tell whether it's AI or not. It just needs to be good, I suppose. That's kind of the core of all of this. I think back in the day we were it was always the question like, oh, is that been written with AI? Is it not? Now it's much more about is it good or not? Because the
Yeah,
technology is advancing so far that it's almost harder to tell. But what Google will be able to tell is when something is not AI generated. So when they can see a video of a solicitor talking about, the recent work they've been doing. There's webinars on on the website talking about different legal topics, that kind of thing. So I think that's again, yeah. So
yeah,
whilst Google might not be able to tell what's AI generated, it will definitely be able to tell what's not. I don't know if that makes
yeah.
sense.
I think the big thing we did, I think we very, very briefly mentioned it about this new framework, the EEAT framework. So I think that's something to keep in mind. So that stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness. We spoke about that word yesterday, and trustworthiness. So the crux of it is that it seems to be claiming to reward content that it's authentic. And one of the things I did a workshop yesterday was talking about case studies and them becoming much more valuable potentially because they they by nature they are talking about experience and expertise and authoritativeness. So there's a potential avenue to explore with case studies and whether if that's something you're not currently working on consistently, whether you can sort of embed them into your website content because it from the sounds of things, it sounds like that's something Google is looking to reward if that's on your site. So that's something to potentially keep in mind.
And what it will definitely penalize is you know, stuffing your website with AI content. So if it
Yeah.
notices a really large volume of content going up on the website, it's going to probably assume that that's AI, and that would really impact things. So yeah, that's just to keep in mind.
Amazing. And I think, yeah, Ryan added to the chat about perhaps doing another session on kind of, I guess, going drilling into the specifics of the content, like newsletters and social media. So definitely we'll keep that on our radar, Ryan. And, whether that's kind of a blog or if we do another conscious conversation or even like a little best bite snippet with Joe and Georgia chatting around those topics, that would be really good. So yeah, thank you for the suggestion. Hazel has just asked, do you have any tips of off page, sorry, of off page content? And is it correct that links are no longer necessary?
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't say it's correct to say that links are no longer necessary. Backlinks, are always continue to be a kind of primary ranking signal. And having high quality authoritative links is always really important. Um, but there is also a bigger conversation now about whether it is as valuable as it was before in terms of, but so what I think we are doing at the minute is trying to find a better balance of what other things do we need to be doing alongside your link building strategy. So brand is really highly linked to that. So I think what we will see in the kind of off-site side of things is that PR becoming a lot more important, that digital part PR, local PR becoming maybe more important, that kind of generic link building. But it's still really valuable. It's still, something that Google values. But we do have, so maybe Joanna is a bit more of an expert to speak on that. So maybe we could set up a blog or something. We could think about maybe asking Joanna to write a blog about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, it sounds good.
That
Um,
answers.
Fab. So we've got 1 minute left. So unless anyone has any burning questions you want to quickly drop in the chat, otherwise I'll in the email follow-up I'll send Joe and George's contact details as well in case you wanted to reach out to them directly. It's also just worth mentioning as well, we will be offering a mini geo audit for all the attendees here today. So, that's to kind of go over how AI is currently reviewing your website and kind of what areas we can be improving on as well. So I'll provide further details on that in the email, but that's also an option for you guys as a little freebie on us. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and hopefully catch you at the next one next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Have a lovely day.